Hey guys, how's it going? So I hope you're having a good day today, and I hope all is going well with you. So today we're going to do another radio story. And for today's radio story, we're going to talk about a station in the Toledo, Ohio radio market. Today we're going to talk about 94.5 K-Rock, Toledo's new rock perspective. And this is a bit of an interesting story, as now the station is kind of obscure and there's not a lot of information about it online. But I'm going to tell the story the best I possibly can. So to start the story off, we're going to wind back the clock a little bit. So 94.5 was not a Toledo radio station originally. It was a radio station that just targeted Sandusky, Ohio, and some of the eastern counties that were east of Toledo, like Ottawa, Sandusky, and Erie counties mainly. So 94.5 targeted the Sandusky market, and they signed on as WRWR, and I don't know a lot about the station when it was that format. This was the early days of FM radio, so I imagine it was like a full service format. If you know, maybe you could tell me. So by the 1980s, the station was WOSC, which stood for Ottawa, Sandusky, and Erie counties, and they aired an adult contemporary format. It was like adult contemporary. I think it might have went between like hot adult contemporary and adult contemporary. It may have had a top 40 format at one point. I'm not 100% sure. Well, new owners came in and they decided that 94.5 should be a Toledo station, as it would be more advantageous for the station to make more money as a Toledo station than as a station that was just targeting Sandusky and some of the more rural areas around there. Now, if you're not familiar, Sandusky is the halfway point between Toledo and Cleveland, and it's on Lake Erie. So, like, you would have, like, Toledo where Lake Erie starts, and then Sandusky, and then you would have Cleveland. You know, think of, like, if you're familiar with the Ohio Turnpike, like 80-90. That's kind of around where it is. Well, the owners of 94.5 requested to increase their power from about 3,000 watts, I believe it was, to 35,000 watts. And they were approved. And then the station moved into Toledo. And then they decided to change the format to classic rock. Now, around this time, around 1990, the classic rock format had gotten popular around the United States. A lot of markets had a classic rock station by this point, so it only made sense for Toledo to have one, because Toledo was the perfect audience for a station like that. As Toledo was a pretty blue-collar town, much like Buffalo, New York, or Youngstown, Ohio, or Fort Wayne, Indiana, kind of places like that. And, you know, typically a lot of people that work in factories or like tool and die shops and stuff like that tend to like that kind of music. They tend to like classic rock. So, I mean, it seemed like a match made in heaven, and it was. X94.5, which is what they called themselves, instantly became popular. And then, of course, the call letters were changed to WXKR, which stood for X and then rock. So, they battled pretty fiercely with 104.7 WIOT for a handful of years. WIOT, of course, is Toledo, Ohio's heritage rock station, and there was a lot of like back and forth the owners of 94.5 put up some billboards around the Toledo area that had, the X94.5 station logo airbrushed over WIOT's logo. And I remember they had a logo that looked like Mount Rushmore at one point. And then I think WIOT may have responded the same way with with billboards covering the X94.5 logo. So it was a pretty hefty competition, to say the least. So the stations battled it out. Now, by about the mid 1990s, the station was still doing okay, but the ratings may have slipped a little bit. And the station still had a pretty good following. And also, on a side note, the station, X94.5, over its existence, actually gave away some pretty good prizes in their contests. They gave away, like, tickets to Cedar Point, like gift certificates, like to buy groceries for the 4th of July or, say, Memorial Day weekend, stuff like that. So the station still had a following, but alternative rock had become popular. And there was a station across town that had launched an alternative rock, active rock hybrid as Buzz 106.5, which, despite its signal, was starting to get pretty popular. And by early 1996 had solidified itself in the radio market. So the owners of 94.5 started taking notice of this. And it was decided that they were going to change the format. Well, they decided to change the format to adult album alternative, as I believe they thought that it would that it wasn't going to be a carbon copy of Buzz 106.5, and it wasn't going to be a carbon copy of 88.7 89X from Windsor, which could be regularly received in the Toledo, Ohio area. They figured they would have a niche kind of format that would kind of complement the two, and they figured that would bring in listeners of those stations to hear something kind of different. Now, there's been a couple of sources, and I'm not sure which one is right. Some say the state X94.5 flipped to K-Rock in January of 1996. Some say March of 1996. I'm not sure which one. But anyway, K-Rock launched, and they launched, as said, with an adult album alternative format. And they were playing a lot of obscure artists at first, from what I remember. They were playing some more mainstream artists that were popular at the time, like you would hear Dave Matthews Band, What Would You Say, Blues Traveler, Runaround, and Hook, maybe like a mellower track from Stone Temple Pilots, like Lady Picture Show. Then they might play, I guess my mind is going a bit blank here, like Natalie Merchant's Wonder or Carnival or something like that. So it was definitely on the mellower edge. And then they were playing some really obscure artists too, that typically really didn't get a lot of radio play, like the Y Store. And this has to be one of the funniest names for a band that I've ever heard, Screaming Cheetah Wheelies. So they were playing some really kind of out there stuff. Well, the station's ratings kind of crashed at first. I mean, this totally alienated X94.5's audience, and they left. They either went to WIOT, or they were putting tinfoil on their radio antennas and tuning in WCSX from Detroit or WNCX from Cleveland if they were more far east. But the station got off to kind of a rocky start. As said, it was a hybrid of stuff that you would hear on a college station and some mellower alternative rock tracks. And they would throw in an 80s song every so often. They would throw in like Mike and the Mechanics, All I Need Is a Miracle. Big Country in a Big Country, Gary Newman Cars, stuff like that. And every time they played an 80s track, they would always say, from the XKR archives. And then they would say, it's time for another retro rewind through the 1980s, as one of the station liners went. Well, the ratings were pretty flat. And over time, they started phasing out some of the more obscure adult alternative artists, and they started adding a few more mainstream tracks, like Green Day's When I Come Around, Stone Temple Pilots, Plush, Pearl Jam, Even Flow, Folk Implosion, Natural One, stuff like that. And there was an article. I was actually able to find a couple of radio articles online that were from the Toledo Blade from the late 1980s, and the columnist who wrote most of these articles' name was Chris Borelli. And there was an article that came out about a year after the station launched, and he described the station as, when you went to the studios, the station really looked like something, and it was really hard to tell the station was struggling. And a person that worked at the station, who had also worked at X94.5, admitted that he missed the classic rock format that they had. And with the ratings being poor, it was suggested that possibly the station could flip to country, or possibly flip back to classic rock. So the station kind of struggled on for just a little bit. And by the summer of 1997, the station repositioned itself. They phased out a lot of the adult alternative tracks, and they went to more of a mainstream alternative rock format, but still avoiding like the more harder tracks. Like they didn't play like Rage Against the Machine or anything like that, or they really didn't play Nine Inch Nails or anything of that nature. And the station's ratings really did not get any better. The damage was pretty much done by this point. Now, what they should have probably done if they were going to relaunch the station is they should have probably stunned for a couple of days. And what they should have done was give the station a new name, give the station some new station liners, revamp the whole thing instead of trying to put a Band-Aid on it. So the station was, not too long after, the station was sold to Cumulus Broadcasting, which you have to remember at this time, a lot of stations were being sold to big conglomerates. This was the age of radio consolidation. And I wish that guy would turn his headlights off. This was the age of radio consolidation. And, a lot of bigger broadcasters were just gobbling up stations left and right. So Cumulus Broadcasting came into the Toledo, Ohio radio market, and they purchased a handful of stations, WXKR being one of them. So it was kind of rumored that after the purchase that K-Rock was not long for the market. It was doubtful the alternative rock format was going to stay. And it was kind of becoming inevitable that likely the classic rock format, that there was a good chance that was going to return. I believe it was in January. It was soon after New Year's of 1998, or pretty close. I believe it was right after New Year's of 1998 or so. K-Rock went off the air, and the station stunned for I think they stunned for about a week, maybe about a week, 4 days. And what they did was they would play a classic rock track, and then it sounded like somebody dragging a needle across a record. And they were playing the same clips of songs over and over. Like, you would hear the intro to Doobie Brothers' China Grove, or an intro to Steely Dan, Reelin' in the Years, Led Zeppelin, Whole Lotta Love, you know, staple classic rock tracks that you expect to hear. And obviously, it was pretty clear that K-Rock was gone. Then I found another article that said, I think it was titled "WXKR Pulls the K-Rock Plug," and explained that K-Rock's ratings weren't very good, and that they ended up pulling the format off. And the article said that the station would be switching to a different style of a rock format. And then I believe it was like on the following Monday, the classic rock format returned as 94.5 XKR as you know it today, and is going to be celebrating its 28th birthday soon. So happy birthday, XKR. But this was an interesting format. K-Rock was an interesting format, but it was clear that it just wasn't a good fit for the market. Now, could Adult Album Alternative have done better if the station would have done differently? It's really hard to see. Could the station have made it as an alternative rock station, like if they had done that right at the start? Maybe, just maybe. After K-Rock went off the air, there was another article in the Toledo Blade that I managed to find online that it said something like "wanted interesting radio station," and it described K-Rock as a station that had a lot of heart and that had a lot of interesting ideas, but the failure was based upon poor music research, which I would say that was probably true. They really didn't survey the market very well, and they really didn't survey probably really what people truly wanted. So, so that's why the station failed. And the writer of the article said, well, now we're stuck with another station that plays Elton John and Led Zeppelin and stuff that gets played on other stations. But then again, that's kind of what the Toledo radio market wanted. After the failure of Adult Album Alternative, returning the classic rock format, I mean, that from a business perspective, that just made common sense. And so it was an interesting station, and there's just not a lot of information out there about K-Rock. It was pretty much discarded and buried in a pauper's grave, and it's part of the history of the station that pretty much nobody wants you to remember, but now you know some about it. Well, guys, that's going to do it for me. I want to thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and as always, guys, have a great rest of your day.